Yep, my name's Carsten, and this is about a box full of fluff. As we all know, the internet is run by cats because the internet is full of cats. So this is about miscellaneous tips and tricks on doing Tizen development. Who here is actually doing any Tizen development already? Hands up. Okay, a couple of you. Who here is doing native development versus web? Okay, even a couple. So for you guys, this will be relevant. For the rest of you, it might not make any sense, which means I'll go through quickly, and then we can get to the interesting questions and answers bit. So first of all, screen assumptions. Tizen is not Android. Tizen does not run your application equaling the screen. Your application is in fact a window in a normal windowing system where it may or may not use up all of the screen at all. It may use up all, may use up some. All windows are by nature resizable at any time. The fact that your window may not actually commonly be resized does not mean you should develop your application assuming it will not be resized. So a good example of actual dynamic resizing at all times is actually switching from portrait to landscape. You do actually have a say in that in your application, deciding if you want to switch from one to the other. But that is, from all intents and purposes, from the point of the native toolkit, an actual resize. So for example, go from 480 times 800 to 800 times 480. You can in fact create more than one window. Your one app can own multiple windows. It can in fact own 100 windows if it really wanted to. There is nothing really stopping that from happening. And more than one window may be visible to a user at any one time. So don't just assume that your window is on top and that means it's active. That is not necessarily the case, even though it may be the common case. And your window may be positioned anywhere on screen. So don't just assume it is going to fill the screen at all times. If you keep in mind these assumptions or keep in mind not making the assumptions that you own the screen, your life is going to be a lot easier, especially in the future, when we add more features to Tizen, where we might share the screen between multiple applications at any one time. So what do you do? No idea what you do. So always think of your windows as if they were running on an actual desktop. They can resize at any time, so lay out your content in a way where it has expandable regions. For example, in the middle there's something scrollable, like a list or a scroller, some widget that can expand and maybe show content that can be scrolled around, or the content is actually naturally able to squash and expand. Do not use Elm Grid. I unfortunately see a lot of use of this widget around the place. And then people on the Tizen developer forums complaining that things aren't working right. The grid widget was specifically built to do one thing: lay things out in a regular grid of n by m. You can change that resolution if you want to anything by anything. But when the grid object itself is resized, all its content is squashed or stretched appropriately. So if you have content in the grid, it will also squash and stretch. And generally speaking, that is not actually the behavior you want. So this is a byproduct of resizing. This may in fact happen also when the virtual keyboard or the input pad appears on screen. If you have a conformant and you put a grid in the conformant, the first thing the conformant will try and do is it'll attempt to resize the content down to its minimum size. Due to the way grids work, their minimum size is in fact 0 times 0 pixels. So thus, your content gets squashed. If there's a minimum size there, it'll get squashed until minimum size, and then it'll get moved around to make room for the keyboard. So don't use a grid unless you like interesting side effects like this. And yeah, it's specifically just for that use. So also keep in mind that font sizes may change in future. We have a scalable UI. DPIs may change. It may run on a television. It may run on a small phone like a Z1, 480 times 800. Who knows? We might release other devices with higher resolution or bigger screens, tablets. We don't know. But at some point, that is going to probably change, and then your layout is going to look bad, and you'll have to adapt. So it's best to do it right today. So only use it if you want that exact behavior. And if you use Elm Grid inappropriately, my ferocious cat will come and eat you. He likes doing this to bad developers. So Edge, there's a lot of talk about using Edge and EDC to lay out UI. Just keep in mind that Edge is an advanced topic. You do not have to write EDC files to create UIs, unless you're very picky or fussy and really want to do something very specific. You do not have to use an Elm layout unless you really want to use these Edge files. You can use standard widgets and components, tables, boxes, that will happily lay out your content nicely at their minimum size, expand certain things based on hints. That was how it was intended to work. That will then make your UI port forward over time and, in fact, keep functioning today correctly as well. Also keep in mind that EDC, I'm going to sound like it sounds really bad here, was originally a temporary solution about 10 years ago, give or take. It was a temporary solution to get data into a library. Unfortunately, temporary solutions love to stay around and never go away, so it's still here. It was actually intended to be machine readable, not human readable. So it looks a lot like a data structure, and that was actually its whole intent. But to make your life easier for this, we actually have GUI editors today that let you edit these things. So to save yourself some time, use these. Inventor is one of them, and a fleet is in fact a new one. So that's actually a fleet. It allows you to create custom themes, modify all the elements, it gets you a full preview, you can do animation, and you pretty much don't ever have to see any text. All you do is click, drag, click, whatever, select something else, and you'll see all your results instantly. There is in fact a project page for it on enlightenment.org. At some point, this will appear in the Tizen SDK. Until then, you will have to get that. Just note that Tizen as a platform does use EFL, but you can use EFL outside of Tizen. If you want to, you can get packages for Ubuntu, for Debian, for Arch, for a whole bunch of Linux distributions. They're already there and done. Just install them, and you can in fact do the same development on your desktop that you can on Tizen. And eFleet will run on there and let you edit your EDC files and save you a lot of time. Inventor is the other one. This has recently now been added to our SDK, new tool. It gives you an instant preview of everything you're typing, and in fact it works the other way too. You can click on things and it'll jump the right bit in the text. It does save you a lot of time and energy and makes your life better. So use it instead of just editing plain text files with a plain editor. It's going to save you time. So yep, coming in an SDK near you soon. It actually looks like this in the SDK. You notice the different look. That is actually Edge files. Edge files define theme, they define look and feel, and if you change Edge files, you can change look and feel like that. You can change how scroll bars look, toolbars, colors, fonts, everything else. So that's the Inventor thing you have. Use it, very useful. So documentation is another issue I see. A lot of people do in fact complain that there is not enough documentation. So EFL is a large part of the native APIs. It is an open source project. It was an open source project before Tizen existed. It still is an open source project. One of its main focuses is in fact in supporting Tizen. It is in fact very, very important because, well, I work at Samsung and Tizen is very important to Samsung. Thus it's important to me. Thus it's important to EFL. So because it's an open source project, often our documentation sucks. It's really not that great. Because we focus on our code, we focus on algorithms, on speed, on optimizing something, on adding a new funky feature, because that's what we love to do. We love to create. But documentation is this task that just we don't like to do. So our documentation isn't that great. I humbly apologize. But it is not a black box. It's not a proprietary piece of code. The toolkit itself is documentation. It is sample code. With the sample code comes sample applications, comes bits of code that show you how to use widgets. And it comes from the people who wrote the toolkit itself. So yes, it's not a nice page you can print out on and put into a book, but it is a piece of code you can compile and run. And in fact, it is compiled and run by default if you build elementary. which is the widget layer library in EFL. So in addition to the Tizen documentation that is there, which is actually quite good, we do have all of these things. These are places where you can go and look for more documentation. Enlightenment.org has documentation, and it has full API documentation, like reference for all the APIs that are there, for EFL and elementary. And then there are a whole bunch of Git repositories. There are, in fact, already made sample applications. I, in fact, have written those two at the bottom. Terminology is, in fact, a terminal emulator, replaces Xterm or GNOME terminal, just because I wanted a fancy terminal emulator that plays videos in the background of my terminal while I'm editing code, because I like to look at videos while I edit code. I like multitasking. Elementary itself actually has a whole bunch of test code. Elementary test is a binary, a utility, to test elementary and show off what it can do. Use that code. There is a lot of examples in there. The tests are named the same things that they are named as files. So if you see an entry test, it'll be test_entry something.c. Rage is actually a video player I wrote because I got tired of using mplayer. It really looked too boring to me. And it does things like does video thumbnails of any video file or stream. It does previews, live previews, listing them, etc. It shows you how you can do nice multimedia experiences, and can also serve as a really good example of how to use EFL. If you don't use existing sample source as documentation, my hungry cat will eat you. He gets very hungry, like that. Threading. In the EFL world, we have a certain view of how to do threading. Yes, I know other people disagree and they have their own models and their own ideas about to do it. But unfortunately for you, if that model disagrees with what we decided to do, you will be fighting with the toolkit. We actually do try and push a certain model of threading on developers for various good reasons. One of those reasons is it leads to more stable code with less bugs. If you have threads that all of them go and mess with the same data, you're busy having to lock and unlock everything, and remember to unlock and lock everything, then worry about deadlocks and all your other wonderful fun, it often leads to a lot of bugs that are often very hard to debug, very hard to find, and then very hard to fix. If you take your work and you split it up and you isolate things, so thread A works on data set A, and when it's done, it hands over its results to something else. Thread B works on data set B, hands over its results to something else. That is the kind of model we push in EFL. And in order to make that interesting and useful, we actually have APIs to do that. So we assign all of UI, main loop, and currently rendering to the main loop. We will actually, okay, in Tizen 2.4, software rendering for Evis has actually moved off to a thread, but the rendering is triggered from the main loop. GL is still done from the main loop, but the GPU is fundamentally kind of a parallel processor. So all of UI, main loop, timing, and conceptually rendering is meant to be done by the main loop, or the main thread. And that handles application state. So you take a thread and you use something like equal_thread to create another child thread. In fact, equal_thread handles a thread pool for you. So you can go and create thousands and thousands of these threads, and they'll be automatically assigned to the next available worker. And that worker will run, and when it's done, it'll hand the results back to the main loop, and then the main loop can go and implement those results. So then you get some UI will modify, items get added to a list, some image appear, etc., etc. So read the examples in that documentation. It'll make your life a lot easier when you follow them. So all of this is pretty much a message passing paradigm where threads go and do some isolated work, message pass back to the main loop, which goes and implements. There's also the ability for the thread to do a synchronized lock with the main loop, wait for the main loop to finish doing things, and then go do it itself and then release that lock. So in general, my advice would be, and I have actually gone through this fairly quickly, faster than I thought. If something is hard, you're doing it wrong. Generally speaking, the design is such that if something is easy, you're going with the flow, you're doing it right. If something is difficult, you've probably chosen a hard path. Reality is there probably is an easy path, almost definitely. And this is a result of actually talking with people who come and say, hey, I have a problem, I can't do this, or this is slow. And then after a while, I discover what it is they want to do, and I go, oh, you're doing it wrong. No wonder it's hard. You can cut your code down to a quarter of the size if you do this. But the problem is discovering what this is. So generally speaking, if it's hard, it's a sign that you're going the wrong way, and you probably should stand back a bit and think. One of the reasons why EFL may be hard in Tizen is that it actually takes a fairly different view to a lot of other platforms. Especially with a scene graph, where you no longer do the drawing. It's not your job to optimize. It's a toolkit's job to optimize. It's your job to describe the world to the toolkit on a high level and let it do all of that work. So, but in all seriousness, it isn't really about cats with cheese on their head. So, doing it the hard way means you're probably doing it wrong. Just imagine EFL is like a bunch of ingredients: pepperoni, cheese, capsicum, a bit of bread, tomato paste. From our point of view, we see that and go, yeah, you've got a pizza. But we're kind of expecting you to see the ingredients there can make a pizza, but it's your job to make a pizza. And as developers, it's your job to go and make really cool, interesting, and different pizzas out there. So also one way that you can save yourself time and effort in making that pizza is ask questions. There are Tizen developer forums. There is a Tizen IRC channel on Freenode, #Tizen. You can send email to the Tizen mailing lists and ask questions. There are also upstream, Enlightenment, and EFL mailing lists, etc., etc. In fact, actually a couple of days ago, a developer came in who was using Unity, and they were actually wondering how to create a pop-up box using the native toolkit. And there is, in fact, a missing API, apparently, in Unity's APIs to get a window handle. But they got this information from upstream, and they were actually quite happy. They just spent, 5 minutes talking, and they got an answer to their question. Pretty much was, you're missing an API. You need to go talk to the Unity guys, which is exactly what they did. And the Unity guys are responding quite positively. So talking with the people who write the code is very, very useful. And those people are available. You can actually talk to them. So one big complaint a lot of people have, C versus C++. The APIs are in C. That does not mean you cannot use C++ for your applications. You do not have to use C, but you need to call C APIs. That you do need to do. In general, C is in fact a far simpler language than C++, and it is much less effort to learn than C++. If you already know C++, you already know C. It is already pretty much a subset of what you know. So it shouldn't be that hard, and maybe it's more a matter that you're not used to seeing C APIs, and that you should just try them out. You'll probably find it's not that bad. So feel free to write your applications in C++, but you can call all the C APIs directly from them. If you want to, wrap C APIs in your own C++ objects. That's perfectly allowed. So EFL does allow you to create your own objects. If you want to create your own custom widget, there is in fact something specifically for that. They're called smart objects. Smart objects are a way of containering a bunch of child objects, which can also be other smart objects, or can be basic objects, rectangles, images, text, etc., etc. And when you container these, you can decide how you lay these out. You can move them, resize them, stack them, change their properties, delete them, add them, whatever you want to do. But you can build your own widgets effectively using smart objects. In fact, if you look at the sample code I pointed to earlier, things like terminology and rage, they in fact make really good use of this. They create little custom smart objects for when we want to, let's say, have a background to a terminal. And that background can display video, animated GIFs, still images, SVGs, PDFs, PowerPoints. Yes, I can have PowerPoints as the background to my terminal. And it's just a smart object that adds a bunch of logic on top of some basic objects that then allows me to set it as a background. You can do the same thing, Look at the examples, they're there. It'll save you a lot of time and effort. By the way, my cat's name is actually Malak, and he hasn't eaten any humans yet. So it's not that dangerous. You won't be in that much danger yet. So I've gone through quickly because I'm sure a lot of you are wanting to drink and eat and be merry for the evening. But if you have any questions for me, any queries, ask me now. Because otherwise my fearsome cat will eat you. So do you have any questions? Anything? Yes? Third-party library. What third-party libraries? You need to make a... Oh. Jars? Oh, charts. That's kind of difficult. Okay, okay, on a pure principle basis, creating a library is easier. It's like creating any shared library on Unix, Linux. There's tons of documentation out there on the internet how to do that. And you would build an RPM, then you would install it. Here's the catch. That won't work on any Tizen TV, on any Z1 phone, on any Tizen watch, because that requires root access to do. The Tizen App Store doesn't distribute libraries. So there isn't really a way for you to distribute a library in Tizen officially in products.
Might not be officially, but it would be a third party. Developers use it. Like Android has a lot of third party libraries.
No, sure. What you do is you wouldn't really make a library. You'd probably just, here's a bunch of code, include it into your app, build it along with your app. You can create .SOs or you can create .As. .As are archives for statically compiling in. And all you have to do is generate a .A and then give it to developers and say, link this in with your code. And generally speaking, if you make shared libraries, and then let's say you use CMake or AutoTools, which is the standard Linux way, it will automatically build .SOs and .As by default. And both will actually get installed. And generally what happens on most Linux systems is those .As are stripped out into a separate package called a dev or a devel package. And they're only installed if you install the devel package along with headers. The idea being that me as a developer, if I compile and I link to that library, I can choose to link statically to that library, and thus it'll use the .A instead of the .SO. So it is absolutely perfectly possible to do it. You just have to basically produce .As.
But looks like a lot of job.
It's not much. It's actually very easy. It's very, 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 very easy. I learned how to do libraries when I was a student by reading someone else's make files. It's really easy. This was back in like 1995. It's so easy. I could do it back then. You can do it while like twiddling your thumbs. It sounds complicated. Trust me, once you look at some examples, it'll look much easier. It'll be much simpler for you. No, it isn't click a button and like, you know, we're done. You do have to edit some text. But do you know what? Nothing ever good came easily. But it really isn't that hard. There's so many other things that are so much harder. That one's easy. Yes, you with the blue thing. No, everyone has a blue thing.
The blue thing, okay. So my question is about the C versus C++.
Yep.
Even within Samsung, different teams are going from C++ to C, and other teams are going vice versa, the opposite way actually.
Yep.
So what's your take on that, and what is it just decision based on that team's expertise? Or
I would say it's a team. Okay, my general take on languages is this. Programmers are religious nuts. We're religious about our programming languages. We learn a programming language, then we love it. We think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and we're going to solve every problem with that one. Most of us are fairly religious about our programming. Some people just happily move to a new language all the time. I learnt C many, many years ago, and I got to the point where C is not a problem for me personally. My brain reads C like it reads English. I read C code and I don't even think about the language. It's like, it's second nature to me. And generally speaking, when I go and read things like C++, I read it and I go, so why does that do that? And it's hidden somewhere in the details of the language, that it's a side effect. Of course, I inherited this inherited that class, and I have to dig through all the classes to find out what I inherited to know why that method is there. It kind of doesn't make me happy. I like things simple and obvious. But then again, I spent my childhood programming in assembly. And for me, C is a really high level, really easy language. It's also obvious. Assembly is a lot more work. It's a lot harder. But to other people, that's different. They started and they were taught to program only at a very high level, and that's going down lower levels. They start losing features that they're used to using. Everyone is different. It depends on your background. I know a bunch of Python programmers who would fall over at the slightest sign of C++. They find C easier because they can actually kind of, fathom it and keep it in their head. Whereas C++, they kind of get really lost in coming from Python. So everyone is different. It's a personal preference at the end of the day. But someone's personal preference ends up deciding what language that project is written in. Linus, if you ever talk to Linus, the guy who wrote the Linux kernel, Linus Torvalds, ever ask him his opinions on C++? He has some very famous opinions on that. He will tear you apart if you ever say, well, we should rewrite the kernel in C++ because it'll be so much better. Yeah, everyone, he has his opinions. And some people agree, some people disagree with his opinions. And you can always see those arguments. So it's all opinions at the end of the day. I personally believe we should support as many languages as possible to make as many people as happy as possible, have as many religions as possible, and all of us get along and not have to kill each other over our religions. That's what I believe.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Normally in EDC file, when we develop a UI, we put the height and wide of that particular UI. Okay. So if I want to design a dynamic UI, like the UI for Samsung Z1, probably the bigger resolutions.
Yep.
How I do that? Okay.
Don't think of your UI in width and height. Think of things like I have something at the top of my screen. That's my toolbar or whatever, my things I can choose. Then maybe I have a bunch of stuff at the bottom that is a bunch of actions or a status. Maybe I have something in the middle that scrolls. And if you break it up like that, don't think of it in width and height. Just think about it in fairly broad elements. Your window or your app will resize and it will scale and scale quite well. If you just think, stand back, don't think this will be 33 pixels wide and 78 pixels high. Don't think of it as like this will be 1.3 inches wide, because 1.3 inches wide may be wider than the screen of a really tiny phone. Just pretend one day someone produces a Tizen phone that has a really tiny screen so it can lurk in your pocket or sit in your wrist. And then if you always think in fixed sizes, either pixels or actual physical size, you'll always hit a problem. If you just think structurally, it helps. I mean, it's kind of a vague concept, but think structurally and then just imagine your UI getting bigger, getting smaller, squishing in different ways, and then imagine what will happen to the widgets based on what the logic is of those widgets, and, well, certain widgets scale and size in certain ways. Just imagine it. Do it in your head. At least that's what I do. I do it in my head. And then as I'm doing it in my head, I go, no, that won't work. Ooh, that might work. Okay, I'll do that. So keep that in mind. That will mean you'll be resizable. The downside is a lot of extra mental load to do that. You can, if you want to, decide that you'll have different layouts at different resolutions, and then within certain ranges, you can switch. So you can actually listen to resizing on your window, and based on size and current scaling factors and a bunch of other stuff, you can go, oh, I'll switch to that. Delete, recreate widgets, based on where you are. So it's perfectly possible.
Okay, last time I have done this kind of stuff. Okay, I have two UI. Okay, I want to design for I have two devices, and I want to design for a single the UI. So I have passed. I have used that a flag, suppose flag for Samsung Z1 or flags for other device. So I have passed the parameters from this C file to the through the programs, and the things have done that. So is that the proper way?
That you can do it any way you like. That is one way to do it. You could have the edge file decide to lay out things differently and emit signals and say, go into small mode, medium mode, large mode, go into wide mode, go into tall mode. Depends. So if you're on a television, for example, no, there is no Samsung or Tizen television at this point that allows native development. Let's just assume now, for argument's sake, there is. You could go into large screen, wide mode. And you could just have a different set of logic or layout there for that and just emit the signal. That's perfectly possible. Or you can build your widgets yourself in code, tear them apart, put them back together, also perfectly possible.
Okay, I have another question. Sorry. I have used Inventor for Linux, but it is not present in Windows. So is there
No, sorry, which one? Inventor?
Inventor, right?
I think it will be. The new
2.3
SDK, I think, has a Windows build for it.
Okay,
I think.
2.3 revision 2, it is not present. I don't know. 2.3 revision 2, right?
No, I think 2.4 has a build, I think.
2.4.
I think it's for 2.4, for the SDK for 2.4.
Okay.
It's new. I know it's being done. I've seen it.
Okay.
I actually personally don't actually track exactly when the release comes out, like which one it comes out in, but I know it's being done. So it will come soon. If it's not there right now, it'll be out really, really soon. Until then, okay, yeah, you'll have to use Linux. Hey, what's wrong with using Linux? Tizen is based on Linux. It's great.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, next. What was the question, Anna? Yes, you with the blue thing around your neck.
Thank you. My question is more generic. Like, if you talk about most of the matured SDKs, like Microsoft platform or iOS platform SDKs, they have a single code base for targeting multiple devices.
Yes, I know what you're getting at. Yes, we have a TV SDK, we have a wearable SDK with a mobile SDK. Oh, there's a Tizen 2.3.1 SDK, the Tizen 2.4 SDK now, right, for different targets.
I can see the documentation 2.4, it includes the TV profile included in the SDK, but
Yep.
you have to create a separate project for TV profile, your wearable profile and mobile profile.
Yep.
So why, is there any roadmap Tizen has that with single code base can targeting multiple devices?
Okay, so first of all, there's the SDK problem. We had lots of different SDKs for different things, which meant you need a different project, because it was a different SDK. That is something that we actually are cleaning up. It's something that probably shouldn't have happened. I highly apologize to everybody. We should not have done that, but it is an artifact of many things that has happened. So we're really sorry. That shouldn't continue to happen. The other thing is that within one SDK, you want a single project for everything. In pure theory, it's absolutely possible. It's really an SDK artifact at this point, and it's something that we need to fix.
Thank you.
Complaint registered. something I shall grumble at people about as well. So, yes, you're in the blue thing with around the neck.
I have 3 queries. So, when did EFL development start? Like, I know that you were the...
Oh, that's a long story.
So just how many years?
So EFL kind of started back in 1996.
Okay, so...
which is one of the reasons why it's written in C, by the way.
20 years.
It started in 1996, but it isn't really the EFL you see today. It started as a bunch of predecessor libraries. The EFL you see today really started about 2001.
Okay.
And that's what you actually really see today.
Okay, so I want to know, like, why it took such a long time to get commercialized. It's almost 15 years, right?
Because it was an open source project that never aimed to be
So
commercialized.
if you claim it's so good and so nice, so why did people not pick it and commercialize so quickly? That's my first question. The second question...
Oh, okay, no, I can tell you why. I can tell you why that. No, we'll do one question at a time.
Okay.
So, first one reason was that I was silly and missed the boat that everyone wanted a desktop environment on Linux, and thus basically that place got crowded and filled up with GNOME and KDE. And EFL's strength wasn't really, well, there wasn't really an EFL for desktop at the time. It was kind of being built, put together. And they had already managed to get in and basically own the space. Something that EFL was really good at was small, lean, mean devices. So back in 2000, 2001 or so, Compaq released this thing called an iPAC PDA. It ran a 206 megahertz strong arm. It had 64 megabytes of RAM and 16 megabytes of NAND. It wasn't even eMMC. You actually had raw NAND, so you had to run JFS2 and things like that. And there was, in fact, a Linux port to that. And when I saw that, I went, that's the future. That's what's going to, one day that's going to be it. And believe it, that's actually where smartphones went. And the iPAC actually had a modem sleeve you could get, so it could turn into a phone. So I was developing for that, and believe it or not, I talked to a lot of people at the time, and they went, oh, but Linux will go nowhere. Linux can't run on embedded, it uses too much power, it's too big, too slow, you can't do anything. And EFL was tied to Linux. Everyone was interested in Pocket PC, in Symbian, in Tron, in everything but Linux. And really Linux wasn't legitimized. And it was in fact about 2008 or so, in fact once Android came out, that people finally went, oh, Linux can run on these things, which I actually spent many years trying to explain to very large electronics manufacturers, and they disagreed with me. So, yeah, we're going to finish soon. And your last question?
No, two.
Okay.
You almost all your libraries are starting with letter E, Edge, Elementary. What's this obsession with this letter E?
Because, okay. Long ago in a land far, far away, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was a little boy, I was a student, I discovered that all the applications that were X started with X, and the GNOME people went, all the applications started with G, and the KDE people went, all their things started with K. Well, at the time, I wanted a better window manager because my display sucked and it was really ugly, so I decided to create a window manager called Enlightenment. Every other window manager at the time was called TWM, FVWM, CTWM, or VWM, etc. And I really just didn't want to follow the whole something WM. So I called it Enlightenment because it was kind of an inspiring word. It made me think positive things. And ever since then, because Enlightenment started with an E, like GNOME started with a G, and KDE started with a K, and X started with an X, everything we did started with an E. So it just kind of followed it. I've kind of gotten bored of that by now, and now I start naming things like the apps like Terminology and Rage. I name them because I like the naming something that has meaning to it and like evokes an emotion. So yeah, so it's just convention.
Okay.
Yep.
One last question.
Yep.
Many people are already familiar with HTML5.
Yep.
So I can see a familiarity between that HTML5 and Java, and in case of EDC and C. So can there be any provision like people can still develop in HTML5 and there can be some tool which converts that HTML5 into the EDC and they can do some?
Ooh, that would be quite difficult because Edge it could do it. It would have to generate quite a lot of JavaScript and other things to generate. Oh, sorry. You could generate HTML5 from EDC, generate EDC from HTML5. No. You really couldn't do that without very much limiting yourself to a very specific set.
Okay, because people have to learn EDC formatting, everything again. They already know HTML5. So I just wanted to avoid that. If you can have
let me put it this way. Back when Netscape came out, people had to learn something other than groff or troff that we did for man pages. They had to go and learn HTML. At some point, people had to learn C++ from C or learn Java. Everyone complains they have to learn something. Well, that's life. You've got to learn something. There's new things. And that has been the case for all of history. There's always been something new and you have to learn it. And everyone always goes, but I don't want to learn it. How do I not learn? How do I just keep doing exactly what it is I'm doing and not change? And that is a constant through history. And yes, we can try and make stuff. Whatever we make will be fairly poor and it won't really be very useful. Just, you can learn something. It's okay. It won't hurt you. And it doesn't take that long to learn it. You can get the basics pretty quickly in about 10 or 15 minutes. The basics, and then you just add the bits you need when you need them. So
we have a pretty large web developers, so they already know that. So that's the way I was asking.
I know, but they can actually go and do web. There's HTML5 in the platform. They don't have to do native. They can keep doing it and not have to learn a single thing. Isn't that great? It's awesome. Okay, we're done. We finished. If you have more questions, you can ask me outside. I hope you guys have had a great day, and I hope you're not too hungry and waiting to run away too quickly. Thank you very much for listening to me or putting up with me. Hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
Well, Carsten, that was a brilliant session. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to an end with sessions wherein you gain knowledge. And yes, post this, we're going to have a session towards the evening, the late evening, which we call it as the social event, which is filled with entertainment, fun, and frolic. But before that, I would request everybody to fill in the feedback forms about this session and hand it over to the volunteers or the crew members around. And also, it's a kind request for each and everybody to slowly move towards the out of the banquet hall there. Once again, it's a kind request to each and everybody around to slowly start vacating the hall here.